Hey everybody, Ocean here for the Creative Corner. This is the opportunity where we get to meet new authors, find out about their books, what motivated them to write them, and where they want their books to go. And again, joining me is the Flash. G'day mate.
Hey man, happy Monday morning.
And to you, my friend, tell me something new, Flash.
Yeah, you asked me to come up with something new, and so I'll give you an option, A, B, or C.
All right, I'll take option C, Flash.
Option C is I'm thinking about buying a house.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah, thinking about it.
It's a good move, yeah.
So try and save up a bit more cash, and then I'll look at buying a bit of property.
Bit of property, buy land, God's not making any more of it. So they say anyway. So also joining us is Ron Thomas. How are you, Ron?
Good morning, Ocean. Good morning, good morning, good morning.
Good morning. All right, now we're going to find out a bit about you. What's your history? Who are you? Who's Ron Thomas?
Well, I'm a man who loves stories, and I've been involved in stories all my life for one purpose or another, and one day I decided to chuck in a perfectly good job and try and keep writing as long as I can, and that's what I'm doing.
A perfectly good job. So you threw in a perfectly good job. How long ago was that?
That was the day I turned 65.
Okay.
Yesterday.
15 years.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
I began by writing a musical, strangely enough, and I decided musicals were quite difficult, and I turned to books. I've written 10, of which half are either published or on the way to being published, and the other half are a storehouse of better and better books, because I'm hoping I'm getting better at it by now.
Hope, belief, you've got to trust in yourself that you're getting a little bit better each time. So where did the motivation to just throw in the towel and change course to writing?
Well, I'd had a previous retirement. 10 years prior, I'd sold my business and then been asked to come back and run the business for someone else on the basis that I could buy back half if I made it work. So I made it work, but during that period where I was retired for the first time, I discovered I wasn't ready for it. So by the time I reached 65, I was well prepared to do a number of things. I had a long bucket list, some of which I'm working on and some I've accomplished. I decided I want to be a good cyclist. I'd been a cyclist when I was younger, and I decided that I'd go in the Masters Games, and I won 4 golds and a bronze there. So I ticked that off and got off the bike. No, I'm still riding, actually.
Good on you.
I'm still riding, and I'm going to do it again when I'm 80.
Oh, good on you.
Which is next year.
How impressive is that?
How come every time we interview these authors, we always find out something new about them? So this Masters Games, is that right?
Yeah, it's the Australian Masters Games, yeah.
And how old were you when you did that?
I was 70.
70.
70, yeah, and I won 4 medals on the track. There were only 4 medals up for grabs, but a bit like my writing, once I decided to do it, I decided to do it seriously. So I was riding 400 Ks a week, and I'm sure my competitors weren't. So I prepared myself for it and won them and walked away.
Wow.
And that was great fun. I loved every minute of it, and I still love it.
Well, let's get back into the books. Let's talk about the writing. I want to talk about Souvenirs first. We've just seen that book come to life. It's just been published. Who are the books aimed at? Who is Souvenirs aimed at?
Well, I write for me, and I have 2 things. A great passion for words. I love words. I love the use of simple words. I love the use of complex words when they're the right word. And I learnt that in my real job before I became an author.
Real
proper job that paid money. So I have a passion for words, and I have a passion for history. And that came from my real job, because my real job was travelling around the world finding business partners. So I went to a great number of the world's countries, behind the Iron Curtain, China. I ran a factory in Hong Kong for a while. I went to Japan more than 50 times. Spent a lot of time in the US. And I was generally staying for, a period of a week or 2. And at weekends, I would go and explore the local countryside, the local towns, try and find what it was all about. And I quickly learnt that to do that effectively, you have to study before you go. And I remember going to a place called Fort McHenry, and I didn't realise what had happened there. And when I got home, I found it was interesting, but it wasn't interesting when I was there. So after that, I began to study the places I was about to go to, so that in my free time I could use it effectively. And I sold a few large computers to the Navy to track the Russian submarines in the Coral Sea, and they asked me to go to Massachusetts to learn about them. So I spent a period of some months in West Concord in Massachusetts, and my office happened to sit facing the old North Bridge where the British and the Americans began the Civil War. They call it where the shot was fired that was heard around the world. And I learnt about Paul Revere's ride. So I started to walk Paul Revere's ride each day. From pub to pub, I had a companion, South American guy. And each Saturday we'd start where we'd left off the last week, had 2 cars, so we'd park here, drive there, find a pub, and I just loved the small stories of history that were not part of the written history, they were just the stories of the people who were impacted by the history. And I've developed a great joy and love out of telling stories of that sort.
So it's a historical fiction that you write, and a lot of it has come from those sort of experiences when you were travelling the world and you got to actually go back and see a bit of history.
You might actually find me in there sometimes.
Hey. Well, tell me about, like I've got, we've got Souvenirs that's just been published. We've got Dark Angels that came out some time ago, and you've got the first 2 of the Sollies trilogy, which is Sollies Way, Sollies Legacy, and Sollies Journey is due out 2020?
That's right.
Okay, so tell me about the Sollies Legacy, because that one intrigues me. What's that about?
Well, when I finished writing the musical, I had a period where I thought, what am I going to do next? And I'm, among other things, a passionate Australian. And I decided that I had to start with Australia, even though there was always a thought in the back of my mind that to use my travels, which a lot of them were in Australia over the period, but there were other things to write about than Australia, and I thought, we'll start with Australia. And so I looked for pieces of Australian history that I didn't think were well documented as a starting point. And the thing that I'd realised, I'd often wondered, is in the 1800s, Australia was the richest country in the world, and suddenly it wasn't. And I'd often wondered why, and I figured there were stories in there. And so when I studied it, I found that the years between 1890 and 1893 or 4, they were bad years in every possible way. The banks foreclosed. Only one Australian bank survived those years. And I hadn't known that, and I thought, here's a story coming on. And so they were foreclosing on people in the country, and was drought, bushfires, all the sorts of things we think are new to us now because we've got a baddie. Next thing we'll have floods and we'll think that's the worst. It's the way people work. But they were very bad years, and so I ended up writing a book about an old swagman who rocked up at a property that was where Lightning Ridge is today. And the family there was facing foreclosure on their mortgage, they were facing drought, they were facing falling price of wool and all sorts of things, and the story is about how that old swaggy changed their lives. And at the time I didn't intend it to be a trilogy. I hadn't got around to trilogies yet. I don't think writers get to trilogies until they write books, do they?
I don't think they have that in mind when they start writing, but the story takes you where it takes you, doesn't it? So, I mean, that's quite intriguing. Is there a 4th book in the Sollies Journey, or is that at the trilogy's at?
Well, I've killed him off once, but I don't think, Solly took over my life, really, because people loved it. I've got a small but passionate following of readers, And they loved the stuff. And they kept asking me about loose ends that were left at the end of the book. And I wanted to write other stuff, but I was shanghaied into writing a second book, and in the writing of the second book I realised that I couldn't write a second book because the book I'd written was obviously the middle book. It was a story of how the swagman come to get there, and it was a story of his legacy. It was his impact on the family and their children in the next generation. And so I set out to turn it into a trilogy. And my readership loved the second one, and they've been clamouring for it ever since. Hopefully it's going to come out this year. And that'll be a great joy for me, because I can finally put Solly behind me and get on with 1,000 other stories I've got in my bag.
So you mentioned you have some passionate followers. Obviously your books have been through different publishing journeys. They've been out for a while, and you've got a lot of stories that haven't properly been published yet. What's the sort of feedback that you get from across the board?
People love Solly.
Yeah.
They wonder if he's me in another disguise.
Right.
They look at each other and think whether they're Solly. And when I tell them I don't know where Solly came from, but he's none of the things they think he is, they don't think I invented him. They think he just somehow materialised, or I just copied someone. And I find he's been chasing me around quite a bit, my readers, like Solly. But I've gone on to other things, and I haven't written about Solly for some years, but he keeps popping up.
You mentioned before that you gave up your real job to write. And when somebody does that, usually they look at themselves as a hobby writer. Now, I've known you a bit, I know you pretty well now, and I wouldn't class you as a hobby writer. You've been through trade publishing, and now you're with us doing assisted independent publishing. What is it that you want your books to achieve? What's the mission with your writing? Has it taken that more serious turn for your future?
Of course it has. But if you just hark back to the story about the gold medals, that's the way I do it. I'm fortunate to be in a position. I had a good job for 30 years, managing director for 30 years of a successful Australian company. And I'm not there to do a Harry Potter, because if I was doing a Harry Potter, I wouldn't do the things I'm doing now.
What else do you think the process of writing has taught you? Because you seem to be quite an intelligent, well-learned man across multiple fields, so I'm really interested as to particularly what...
I've learned in my life that if you want to do something, anything, almost anything, you may not do it as a champion, but if you want to do it, you can, provided you focus on the process. I met a lot of new writer friends yesterday, and I found quite a lot of them that are focused on the outcome. And I learnt that the outcome will take care of itself if you get the process right. So when I try to do something new, I set about learning the process that will work. And I carefully look at what works and what doesn't, discard the things that don't, or modify them and do it. And that's part of what I like. I'm a man who likes puzzles, and I see writing as a puzzle. For example, I said Saturday at the writers' conference that typically in my books I'll have 7, 8, 10 chapters on the go at once. And I think that floored the crowd, because most of them seem to be people who start at the start and end at the end. And I can't write that. I discovered that's not the way for me to write books, because I have a great belief in the subconscious, that there's a part of your mind that takes in the day-to-day, and I think that's a small part of your mind. I think the real working part of your mind's your subconscious brain. For example, I do puzzles, and word puzzles. And if I can't get the word puzzle out, I read it carefully, put it down, and sometime in the next 3 days, that word will come to me. I won't always know why it's there. And books are the same. If I'm stuck on a chapter, I'll stop and go and write a different one.
So you've learned a lot about your writing style, and you've obviously a unique writing style that works for you.
I don't know whether it's unique or not, because I've never asked anyone else.
You know, I mean, you didn't learn it from anywhere. You created it from your own experiences writing, and that I think that is unique. What about publishing? Because you trade published before, and now you're doing this process. So what have you learned about the publishing process? Been that process driven?
I've learned quite a lot about the publishing process. I've learnt to be very careful with it. When I finished writing my first book, it was the first time I thought about publishing. I didn't think about publishing it till I'd finished writing, and I think a lot of writers are like that, and they end up with a property. And then they start thinking, well, how can I sell it? And the choices for a first-time fiction writer, I quickly discovered a few and far between. There's not many. And the ones that are there are not always what they appear to be, and not always where you want to go. But I published Sollies Way through a traditional publisher who wanted a contribution to the cost. Unfortunately, when the book sold a few thousand copies, he decided that he didn't want to pay the royalties that were in the contract. So I learnt the hard way to be more careful. My second publisher was a start-up business and asked me to be his first publisher, and flattery will get you everywhere, so I agreed. And he was a great believer in my books, and he, among other things, his wife ran a bookshop, and she and her mother were advocates of my book too, and they sold, all up with the two versions, they sold nearly 1,000 copies through that one bookshop. Wow. So they sold 400 of the first one, and some, I'm not sure how many the second, I've forgotten, but it's about the same number or more. But I discovered the second thing I learnt about publishers. The man who ran the shop, ran the business, became a great friend. He believed in my work, but there's a great temptation in the traditional publishing world to gather authors. It's very hard to knock back a new author because they might be about to write Harry Potter. So he ended up with about 50 authors, and he found he couldn't sustain the 15 books a year he planned, and he ended up back at 9, and I can do sums better than most. And I kind of figured I wasn't getting much of a run. So I had a serious talk with him in October of last year. And 3 months later, he was dead of cancer, and they closed the business. So it was about then I decided to apply what I'd learnt in the business world, and that is have a good study of all the alternatives before you move. And I made my choice, and that's why I'm sitting here. And whether that works is another story. It
certainly will, and we're pleased to have you. And I've liked watching, like every week we have our catch-ups, and we talk about the authors, where they're at. And I always like when we get to yours, because at the moment there's 5 cases open. So we're looking at all the covers of the other books, getting them into the distribution network and ebooks, plus obviously now published with Souvenirs. We see all of this developing, and everybody in the team knows where you're at. So it's always quite interesting to talk about you and where your process has taken you, and our model that works for us. And I do feel confident that through the marketing you'll do well, and time will tell. It's natural for me to look at my own progress through this journey, which I'm absolutely loving, because I didn't feel enough was happening in the traditional publishing world. I didn't think much was happening at all. I'd get a book every 2 or 3 years if I was lucky. But now it's more action than a 79-year-old can handle. And it's great. But there are things in there that even Josh doesn't realise how far I'm back in the trees. Well, I think the great thing about book marketing is that it's an ever-increasing circle, that it is a process, and you're a process man, and I think the point of having a mentor is to, when you hit a point in the process that you're struggling, he's going to take you through it. I am motivated to give him a ring after this interview and make sure he does give you a call today. Go, what do you need, Ron? What do you need?
Because he's already done that.
Oh, yes. Well,
we've had that conversation.
All right.
And we're planning a mentoring session while I'm up here.
Oh, I'll just go back to sleeping. I think my team's got it sorted.
Well, the one thing about running a business, of which I know quite a bit, is the chief doesn't do, in a really good functioning business, the chief doesn't do anything but swan around.
Oh, really?
And I do notice that in you.
Oh, do you?
I do notice you're very good at swanning around.
Oh, you've noticed.
And what's that telling me? That the editors are editing, the mentors are mentoring, and you're just adding your pinch of magic dust occasionally.
Is that how you see it?
Yeah, absolutely. You bloody swan.
Swanner.
And doing a bit of steering occasionally.
Look, actually, that's a very good point. I mean, we have this analogy that Flash uses, and I hope I get this right, where he talks about if it's a ship, you've got the wheel, and I'm up the top, pointing the direction. And it does seem to work, and it's having the trust in the team as well. That's a big thing. And I do trust the process, and I do trust the team, and they also trust that process. So we are pretty confident that what we do is the right thing.
And not only that, not doing that is a way to fail for your business to fail.
Oh, look, you step outside
Because a sad
of it.
story is when I retired and started writing books, the guy who took over from me didn't heed my words about that. 6 years later, the business died.
That's it. This process is there for a reason. We've got 2 more questions. I'm going to go first. As a creative, you're a creative. What would be your spirit animal and why?
Oh, I mean, no doubt about my spirit animal.
Oh,
no doubt at all. In my book, Sollies Way, one of the stories in there is the relationship between a young boy and a young Aboriginal man. And the Aboriginal man tells the boy that his spirit animal is the magpie. And he tells him why. And you'll have to pay for the book if you want to know why.
Yes. Yeah.
But he takes the boy to the Narran Lakes, which is in northwestern New South Wales. And it's after rain, and there are millions of pelicans on the lake. And the boy goes naked, chasing around Narran Lakes, chasing the pelicans. And of course, the pelicans are a wonderful animal. They're so clumsy when they're clumsy, and they're so elegant when they're elegant.
You're a pelican?
I'm a pelican. I'm undoubtedly a pelican, and I happen to live at a place where in spring the pelicans arrive, and they usually come gliding in, sometimes one of them, sometimes 6, 7, 8 of them, they'll come gliding in past my front deck, and if I'm sitting out there having a beer, that will make my day every day for the next week. They are something else, pelicans, and so I've got to go that way.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I love that. I've not heard that before, so well done, unique. Now,
Well, they struggle to fly, but when they
when they do,
They're away.
they're away.
So next question that's a little bit unique. Obviously, the superhero thing means a lot to us, the whole team, and our creed is to work with superhero authors. So, what would be your superhero that you feel most affinity with, or a superpower that if you had to choose, could choose?
I'm forced to come clean on this one.
All right.
The first creed of my writing is that my books have no superheroes whatsoever.
Okay.
That any of my books, you won't find a superhero, an ordinary man rescuing himself by suddenly developing the ability to jump 10-foot walls without touching the top. That is the number one thing of my books. I don't have superheroes in them. It's not for me to judge whether I'm a superhero, but I can tell you who the superhero I reckon suits me best.
Yes.
And you might have heard of him. He's not a recent superhero, didn't come out of Marvel Comics, but it's Popeye the Sailor Man.
He is a superhero. Guy eats spinach, muscles pop.
I eat all my spinach, I fight to the finish. I'm Popeye the Sailor Man. And there you go.
Does anybody remember that?
Yeah.
And you can call me Popeye as much as you like.
Popeye it is, Ron. That's fantastic. Well, guys, we have to wrap this up. Ron, I want to thank you so much for sitting down here, sharing a bit of your life, your writing, and the Popeye just tops it off. That's been awesome. Thank you.
Welcome.
And for all you guys that would like to get a copy of any of Ron's books, there's the link below. Go and check out his social media. He may be learning, but you're always going to find something new. And hey, give him an email and say, "G'day Popeye, how you doing?" Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.